The wind at FOB Sentinel's watch had teeth. It gnawed at the seams of the canvas tents and screamed through the narrow gaps between stacked shipping containers. At 12,000 feet up in the Montana Rockies, air was thin, and mistakes were measured in frozen degrees. It was a place where nature didn't just kill the careless, it erased them. Sergeant Olivia Blackwood felt the cold not as an inconvenience, but as a constant ambient pressure, a reminder of where she was. She moved with an economy that bordered on invisibility, directing two grumbling privates wrestling a pallet of cold weather rations off the back of a transport truck. Her voice was low, barely audible over the gale, yet her instructions were followed without question. Left side first, watch the balance. Tailor secure those straps before you lift. Each word was a tool used precisely and put away. Her breath crystallized in the brutal -30 air, vanishing in the swirling snow that seemed to seek entrance to every layer of clothing. The storm was picking up. Again. Always. From the raised platform of the makeshift command post, a plywood and metal shack overlooking the landing zone, Captain Gregory Reynolds watched her. He saw a woman of medium height, her frame lost in the bulk of an Army-issue parka, her face obscured by a fleece gaiter and goggles. All he could truly discern was the quiet efficiency, and he despised it. Felt like a judgment. He preferred the loud, grunting certainty of his infantrymen, the performative masculinity that defined his leadership style. Blackwood was an anomaly, a logistics NCO who moved like a predator, but was tasked with counting blankets. "Look at her," Reynolds muttered to Sergeant First Class Martinez, his de facto second-in-command. Quartermaster's clerk playing soldier. Bet she's never spent a night outside a heated tent. Martinez, a young man whose swagger was borrowed directly from his captain, snorted in agreement. "Probably put in a requisition for heated toilet seats, sir." Reynolds' lips curled into a smirk. The son of Lieutenant General Reynolds' 3rd Army Command, he'd grown up with the weight of expectation pressing down on every decision. Last year's failed Delta Force selection still burned like acid in his gut. At 40, he was running out of chances to make his mark. He strode down the rickety steps, his boots thudding with deliberate importance. He intercepted Blackwood just as the last pallet was being lowered. "Sergeant," he began, his voice a theatrical boom designed to carry over the wind. "I count 7 pallets. The manifest I signed in this morning said 8. Care to explain the discrepancy?" Blackwood didn't look up from her data pad. She swiped a gloved finger across the screen, her movements unhurried, precise. "The 8th pallet, sir, containing the supplemental high-altitude gear, was rerouted to FOB Granite Ridge by your order at 0600. She finally lifted her gaze. Her eyes, visible above the gaiter, were a flat, calm brown with flecks of amber. "You required the transport space for your personal footlockers." There was no accusation in them, merely a statement of fact. But Reynolds' face tightened. He had forgotten. The correction delivered so plainly and publicly felt like an open challenge to his authority. The privates Taylor and Jensen studiously avoided looking at him, their sudden interest in a loose strap on the pallet all-consuming. "See that the gear is stowed correctly," Reynolds snapped, turning his back on her. "And I want a full inventory of the entire supply depot on my desk by 2,000 hours. Every single protein bar and every last pair of socks." "Understood." "Understood, sir," Blackwood said to his retreating back. The wind whipped the words away, but she knew he'd heard them. She turned back to the pallet. The work continued. Her movements remained unchanged, precise, efficient, and utterly devoid of wasted energy. She was a cake in a machine of function. But the wind, as it howled past, seemed to whisper a warning that the machine was about to break. Olivia Blackwood's personal quarters were sparse by anyone's standards. A 7x10 canvas tent, reinforced with aluminum struts. A cot, a footlocker, a small field desk with a ruggedized laptop. But it was hers. One of the few spaces where she could let the mask slip, if only slightly. She unzipped her parka, the sound loud in the relative silence. The small electric heater in the corner fought a losing battle against the pervasive cold, but it was enough to take the killing edge off. She sat at the desk, booting up the laptop. While it came to life, she pulled up local meteorological data eyes, scanning the patterns of isobars and temperature gradients with practiced ease. Something wasn't right. The barometric pressure was dropping too fast. She shrugged out of her thermal layer, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at old wounds. In the dim light of the tent, the scars across her back and shoulder were a topographical map of pain, jagged lines, puckered circles where shrapnel had been dug out, the smooth shine of skin grafts. 14 pieces still inside her, too deep or dangerous to remove. Permanent souvenirs. On her desk, half hidden under a stack of requisition forms, was a thin file folder with a red classified stamp in the silhouette of an eagle's head. Task Force Guardian, her old unit, her old life. Next to it sat a bottle of prescription painkillers barely touched. She preferred the pain to the fog they brought. She pulled out her secure phone, thumbed a brief message to Dr. Boom. Lowry at Walter Reed. L4, L5, acting up again. Manageable. No change in meds needed. 2 years of physical therapy after what her official record called a non-combat training incident had rebuilt her body, but some damage couldn't be undone. The doctors had called her recovery miraculous. The brass had called her reassignment to logistics appropriate. Olivia had called it what it was exo. Her laptop chimed with an alert. The satellite thermal imaging showed exactly what she'd feared, a significant temperature inversion forming over the eastern ridge. All indicators pointed to a cyclonic event developing within the next 12 hours, not the 24 that the base meteorologist had predicted. Outside, a bullhorn blared, cutting through the constant wind. All officers and squad leaders briefing in 5 minutes. Command post. Repeat, all officers and squad leaders to the command post. Olivia closed the weather models, locked her computer, and reached for her parka again. The mountain was speaking to anyone willing to listen, and it was saying, run. The briefing room was a cramped, frigid container smelling of stale coffee and damp wool. A single flickering fluorescent tube cast long dancing shadows on the faces of the assembled squad leaders. Captain Reynolds stood before a topographical map of the region, a red line snaking its way up to a formidable peak marked Serpent's Tooth. High-altitude reconnaissance, Reynolds announced, slapping the map for emphasis. Command wants eyes on the pass before the next weather cycle moves in. We go in 24 hours. He pointed to Martinez. You have point. Taylor Jensen, you're on his fire team. Standard loadout. Sergeant Blackwood stood at the back of the container, a silent observer as required by her role. She held her datapad thumb, scrolling through meteorological data feeds. The lines on the screen were telling a different story than the one Reynolds was projecting. Sir, she said, her voice cutting cleanly through the captain's monologue. Reynolds paused, his jaw clenching. He turned slowly, an actor annoyed by a disruption from the audience. What is it, Sergeant? The barometric pressure is dropping at a rate of 38 millibars per hour. Olivia said, her voice neutral, yet carrying a weight of certainty. The latest satellite thermal imaging shows a significant temperature inversion forming over the eastern ridge. All indicators point to a cyclonic event developing within the next 12 hours, not 24. The storm will be faster and more severe than forecast. Reynolds crossed his arms, a picture of condescending patience. Is that so? We have a meteorologist in our midst. A few of the men chuckled. Blackwood did not react. Furthermore, sir, she continued, her tone unchanging, the standard issue MREs have a caloric value of approximately 2,500 calories. At the projected altitude and temperature, your men will be burning closer to 6,000 calories per day. They'll be in a severe caloric deficit within 10 hours of leaving the wire. It will impair cognitive function and accelerate the onset of hypothermia. Reynolds walked slowly toward her until he was standing directly in front of her, forcing her to look up at him. Sergeant, he said, his voice a low, menacing growl, your job is to count the beans, not to tell me how to eat them. Your job is to stack the boxes, not to predict the weather. Are we clear? My job, sir, is to ensure this unit is properly supplied and equipped for its operational requirements. She replied, her eyes locked with his. A patrol walking into a blizzard with inadequate rations does not meet that standard. The air in the container grew thick and heavy. The silence was broken only by the hum of the light and the ceaseless moan of the wind outside. Reynolds stared at her, his eyes narrowed, searching for a flicker of fear, a hint of insubordination. He found nothing but a calm, steady gaze. You are dismissed, Sergeant, he finally said, his voice dangerously soft. And since you have so much time on your hands for weather reports and dietary planning, you can spend the rest of the day reorganizing the entire supply tent. I want it perfect, every label facing out, every box aligned. Go. Blackwood gave a short, correct nod. Yes, sir. She turned and walked out of the briefing, her back straight, her stride measured. The supply tent was a cavernous canvas structure, a tomb of crates and boxes. The cold inside was even more biting than it was outside, the air still and heavy. Olivia worked under the light of a single bare bulb, her breath pluming in the frigid air. She moved with the same methodical grace she applied to everything, lifting heavy boxes as if they were weightless, her mind sorting and categorizing, finding order in the chaos. As she worked, her mind drifted back to another mountain, another time. Hindu Kush, Afghanistan. 3 years ago. Task Force Guardian, nicknamed the Guardian Angels by the regular units, had been deployed to extract a Delta Force team stranded on a remote peak after their extraction helicopter crashed in a snowstorm. She could still feel the weight of the medical pack on her back, the bite of the climbing harness across her thighs. The sound of the wind had been the same, a constant, inhuman howl that seemed to get inside your head and make a home there. In her mind's eye, she saw Captain Jack Matthews' call sign Shepherd, his weathered face lined with concern, but his eyes steady. At 62, he had been the oldest active member of the unit, a former mountain warfare instructor who'd fought in more cold places than most people could name. He'd been her mentor, her guide into the world of high-altitude operations. "The mountain is not your enemy, kid," he'd told her during training. "It's your teacher. It doesn't care if you live or die. It just is. Your job is to listen, adapt, and move with it, not against it." She had listened. She had adapted. And when the extraction bird went down in the whiteout, she had moved up the mountain through the storm to the stranded team. 3 men critically wounded, one with a sucking chest wound, all of them suffering from exposure. She'd stabilized them, kept them alive through a night that should have killed them all. And then, the memory fragmented, broke apart like ice sheets in spring. Flashes of gunfire, blood on the snow, the sudden tearing impact in her back and shoulder, the long fall. She shook her head, forcing herself back to the present. That was then. This was now. She had a new job, a new role. She wasn't Sentinel anymore, the call sign that had followed her through 5 years of impossible rescues. She was just Sergeant Blackwood, Logistics Specialist. Her radio crackled. "Recon team is moving out," came Martinez's voice. "Captain wants an early start before weather turns." Olivia looked at her watch. 1,400 hours. They were going 8 hours ahead of schedule, directly into the path of the approaching storm. "Acknowledged," she replied, keeping her voice neutral. "Supply will log your departure." She walked to the tent entrance, pushed aside the heavy flap. In the distance, she could see them, 4 figures moving along the perimeter, heading for the North Trail. Reynolds was leading them personally. Pride, stubbornness, ego. The 3 horsemen of operational disaster. And there wasn't a damn thing she could do about it. Hours passed. The sky outside darkened from slate gray to a deep bruised purple. The wind's howl intensified, a constant shrieking lament. She was cataloging medical supplies when the tent flap was thrown open, letting in a swirl of snow and a blast of Arctic air. It was Captain Reynolds, flanked by Martinez and Jensen. He was holding a large galvanized steel bucket. "Still at it, Sergeant?" Reynolds asked, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Thought you might be getting a little too comfortable in here. We can't have our logistics staff going soft." Olivia stopped what she was doing and stood, her posture neutral, a small voice in the back of her mind noting the recon team's early return. Something had gone wrong. "Out here," Reynolds continued, his voice full of false bonhomie, "you have to acclimate. You have to embrace the cold. It's a rite of passage." He took a step forward. Martinez and Jensen shuffled uncomfortably, their earlier amusement replaced by a dawning sense of unease. This felt different. This was not just mockery, it was a violation. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that Reynolds had done his own research. He'd found fragments of Olivia's redacted service record. Enough to know she'd been part of something called Task Force Guardian. Enough to know she'd been passed over for Delta Force selection 5 years ago, the same selection where he'd washed out last year. The coincidence ate at him. Before Olivia could react, Reynolds upended the bucket. A cascade of impossibly cold, icy meltwater crashed over her head. The shock was a physical blow, a stunning, brutal impact that stole her breath. It plastered her hair to her skull, streamed down her face, and soaked through her fleece and thermal layers in an instant. A frigid violation that reached her skin and leached the heat from her core. For a split second, the world went silent. The roar of the wind replaced by the roar in her own ears. Water dripped from her chin onto the frozen ground, instantly turning to ice. The two junior soldiers stared, their snickers dying in their throats. They had expected a joke, a prank. This was something else entirely. It was an act of profound humiliation, of deliberate cruelty. But it was also something worse. The sudden cold, the shock, the sensation of water soaking through her clothes, they were triggers, is unlocking a door in Olivia's mind that had been carefully sealed shut during 2 years of intensive therapy. In an instant, she wasn't in a supply tent in Montana. She was back in the ravine in the Hindu Kush, half drowned in the icy stream, where she'd fallen after taking fire, her body broken, the world dissolving into pain and cold and darkness. Fight, flight, freeze. The human brain's three responses to mortal threat. For someone with Olivia's training, there was only one option. Blackwood stood perfectly still. She didn't shiver. She didn't gasp. She simply stood there, water dripping from the ends of her eyelashes, her face a blank, unreadable mask. Then something behind her eyes changed, shifted. The calm, professional logistics sergeant disappeared. In her place was someone else. Something else. Sentinel. Reynolds watched her, his smile faltering slightly, waiting for the tears, the anger, the outburst. He wanted a reaction. He wanted to break her composure. He got one. It happened in the space between one heartbeat and the next. She took one short, perfectly balanced step forward, closing the distance between them. Her left hand came up not to strike, but to gently cup the back of his neck as if steadying him. Her right hand, open palm, moved in a short, blurringly fast arc. It wasn't a punch, it was a palm heel strike. A precise application of physics delivered with the full leveraged force of her body weight, connecting squarely with the point of his chin. There was a sickening, wet crack. Reynolds' head snapped back, his eyes rolling up into his skull. His body went limp, all 200 pounds of alpha male arrogance turned to dead weight. He collapsed backward, a puppet with its strings cut, and hit the hard-packed floor of the tent with a heavy final thud. He was out cold before he even started to fall. Silence. Absolute ringing silence, save for the wind. Martinez and Jensen stared, their mouths agape, their minds struggling to process what they had just witnessed. The quiet, overlooked logistics sergeant had just felled their captain with a single effortless blow. Olivia took a small step back. She brought her right hand up, flexing the fingers slowly as if testing them. Then she looked at the two stunned soldiers, her gaze as cold and hard as the ice forming on her uniform. "Get the medic," she said, her voice a low, steady rasp. "And tell Colonel Westfield the captain had an accident." The accident landed Sergeant Olivia Blackwood under arrest. She wasn't thrown in a brig fob. Sentinel's watch was too primitive for such luxuries. Instead, she was confined to a windowless steel shipping container designated for hazardous material storage. It was empty save for a single cot and a chemical toilet. The heavy steel doors were locked from the outside, the thick metal muffling the ever-present shriek of the wind to a distant, mournful hum. Colonel Richard Westfield, the Phobes commander, was a man caught between protocol and pragmatism. He had a captain with a hairline fracture in his jaw, a concussion, and a spectacularly bruised ego, and a sergeant who, by all accounts, had committed a blatant act of assault against a superior officer. A court-martial was inevitable. And yet the reports from Martinez and Jensen were unsettlingly consistent. They spoke of the bucket of ice water, of the captain's goading, of Blackwood's impossible calm before the single decisive strike. Westfield had also taken a second look at Blackwood's file. It was a study in redaction. Black bars obscured entire sections. Her service history prior to her logistics assignment was a ghost. He saw commendations with the citations blacked out, and a medical discharge for injuries sustained in a non-combat related training incident that had taken her out of commission for nearly 2 years. It didn't add up. But what truly caught his attention was a single word on the transfer order that had brought her to Sentinel's watch. A word that shouldn't have been there. A word that in military bureaucracy stood out like a beacon. Requested. Sergeant Olivia Blackwood had specifically requested assignment to this godforsaken outpost, and the request had been expedited, approved at a level far above Westfield's pay grade. While Westfield wrestled with the paperwork and Reynolds nursed his jaw in his quarters, the sky turned a malevolent shade of gray. The wind, which had been a constant howl, escalated into a physical, violent force. Snow began to fall, not in gentle flakes, but in a horizontal blinding sheet. The storm Blackwood had predicted had arrived not in 12 hours, but in 8. It was a whiteout, a churning vortex of wind and ice that reduced visibility to zero and plunged the temperature into a realm where exposed skin would freeze in under a minute. And Captain Reynolds' reconnaissance patrol, the one he'd taken out early before the incident, was out in it. 3 men, Sergeant Taylor's team, sent to scout the approach to Serpent's Tooth. They had checked in an hour after departure, their signal already crackling with static. Then nothing. Silence. Panic, cold and sharp, began to seep through the command post. The radio operator tried hailing Taylor's team every 5 minutes, his calls swallowed by the storm's roar. Sentinel base to Viper 1. Do you copy? Over. Only static answered, a hiss that sounded like the mountain itself laughing at them. Colonel Westfield stood over the topographical map, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. They were out there somewhere in that maelstrom. Their standard issue gear was rated for cold, but not for this. This was a polar vortex, a killer storm. Their tents would be shredded, their radios frozen, their bodies losing heat at a catastrophic rate. They had at best a few hours before they started to die. Get me a rescue team, ready. Westfield barked, his voice tight with desperation. The base's executive officer, a young lieutenant, shook his head. Sir, we can't. The wind speed is over 80 knots. We can't get a bird in the air, and visibility is less than a meter. Sending another team out on foot would be suicide. We just lose them, too. The logic was sound. It was also a death sentence for Taylor's team. Westfield ran a hand over his face, the stubble rasping against his palm. He was out of options. Standard operating procedure had failed. His aggressive academy-trained captain was incapacitated by his own hubris. His men were going to freeze to death on a mountain because of it. And the one person who had seen it coming, the one person who had warned them, was locked in a steel box. The thought struck him with the force of a physical blow. He looked at the redacted file on his desk, then at the storm raging outside the window. Protocol be damned. Westfield grabbed his parka and stormed out of the command post, leaning into a wind that felt solid enough to hold him up. He fought his way across the compound to the hazardous materials container, the snow stinging his face like needles. He fumbled with the frozen lock, his fingers numb and clumsy. Finally, it gave way. He pulled the heavy door open. A vortex of snow swirled into the dark interior. Olivia was sitting on the edge of the cot, not shivering, not pacing. She was perfectly still, her posture erect, as if she were simply waiting. In the dim light, she looked up at him, her expression unreadable. Sergeant, Westfield said, his voice strained over the storm's fury. I have a problem. Blackwood's eyes held his. She didn't speak. She just waited. Taylor's team is out there. Reynolds sent them out before the incident. We've lost contact. He paused, swallowed hard. The storm. It's exactly what you said it would be. The admission hung in the frozen air between them. It was a confession of failure, an acknowledgement of her superior judgment. We can't get a rescue team to them. It's impossible. They're going to die. Blackwood's gaze didn't waver. She seemed to be weighing him, measuring his desperation. I've read your file. What little of it isn't blacked out. Westfield continued, his voice cracking slightly. I don't know who you were before you became a logistics NCO, but I know you're more than what you seem. He took a deep breath. I'm asking for your help. For the first time, Blackwood's expression shifted. A flicker of something, not surprise, but perhaps consideration, passed through her eyes. You're asking the prisoner you have slated for a court-martial to lead a suicide mission. She stated, her voice flat and even. I'm asking the only person on this base who might have a chance. Westfield countered, his desperation overriding all other concerns. I'll take full responsibility. Whatever you need, whatever you want. Olivia stood up. She was shorter than him, but in the confines of the steel box, she seemed to fill the space. The calm she projected was more intimidating than Reynolds' loudest shouts had ever been. My terms, she said, and her voice was no longer that of a logistics sergeant. It was the voice of command, sharp and absolute. 1, I have full operational authority. No one questions my orders. No one, not even you. 2, I get access to everything in the experimental gear locker. Crate 7B, the one Captain Reynolds kept under personal lock and key. 3, I pick my team. Westfield didn't hesitate. Done. He met her gaze. Who do you want? A faint, mirthless smile touched the corner of Blackwood's mouth. Give me the ones who laughed, she said. Give me Jensen and Martinez. Outside, the storm raged on a white fury that swallowed all light, all sound, all hope. But inside the steel box, something had changed. The mountain had sent its challenge, and Sentinel had answered. The transformation was immediate and absolute. The moment Blackwood stepped out of the container, the quiet overlooked logistics NCO vanished. In her place was an operator, a creature of purpose and chilling competence. She moved not with the hurried energy of desperation, but with a focused predatory grace that made the soldiers around her unconsciously straighten their postures. Jensen and Martinez were summoned from their barracks. Their faces displayed a mixture of confusion and dread as they trudged through the deepening snow toward the supply tent. The storm had turned the short walk into an ordeal, the wind driving ice crystals that cut like microscopic razors against any exposed skin. They found Blackwood in the supply tent, her domain. She stood before a large locked steel crate marked 7B, High Altitude Experimental. Colonel Westfield stood behind her, his presence a silent testament to the gravity of the situation. The bolt cutters, she said, not looking at Westfield. Her voice carried an authority that brooked no argument. Westfield produced them without a word. With two sharp snaps, the lock was broken. Blackwood threw open the lid. Inside, nestled in foam, was equipment the two young soldiers had never seen before. It looked like something from a science fiction film. Ultralight exoskeletal snowshoes. Low-profile thermal suits that shimmered faintly under the bare bulb. Compact oxygen regulators and masks. Hypercaloric nutrient paste in silver tubes. And a portable signals booster with a complex collapsible antenna array. This was the gear she had requisitioned months ago. The gear Reynolds had dismissed as unnecessary and locked away. Strip, she commanded. The two soldiers stared at her. Now, down to your base layer. Everything you are wearing is standard issue garbage. It's heavy, it absorbs moisture, and it will kill you. Move. Her voice was a blade. The swaggering bravado they carried like a second skin dissolved. They stripped quickly, their movements clumsy in the face of her intensity. She tossed them the shimmering thermal suits. Put these on. There are no seams. The material regulates heat and wicks moisture at a molecular level. It's lighter and warmer than anything you've ever worn. She demonstrated how to seal the wrists and ankles, her hands moving with the practiced precision of a surgeon. Your body is a furnace. We are not letting a single calorie of heat escape. She handed them the rations. Forget MREs. We're not stopping to cook. One of these tubes contains 4,000 calories of lipids, protein, and fast-acting carbohydrates. You will consume one every 4 hours as I command. It will taste like chalk, but it will keep you alive. She showed them how to strap on the strange snowshoes, which articulated with their boots, distributing their weight perfectly. She adjusted Jensen's pack, pulling the straps tight with a series of sharp, efficient tugs. He flinched at her proximity. Your pack is part of you, she said, her voice low and close to his ear. If it's loose, you waste energy with every step. Energy is life. Do not waste it. She looked at the two of them, their faces pale with a new kind of fear. Not fear of the storm, but fear of her. Their mockery, their snide jokes seemed like relics from another lifetime. This woman was not a clerk. She was something else entirely. Out here, she said, her eyes sweeping over them, the mountain decides who lives. The wind, the cold, the altitude. They are the enemy. They do not care how strong you are. They care how smart you are. Her gaze hardened. You will listen to every word I say. You will do exactly as I command. You will match my pace. You will control your breathing. If you fall behind, I will leave you. Is that understood? 3 sharp, terrified nods were her answer. Good, she said, pulling her own thermal mask over her face. Only her eyes were visible now, hard and bright. Let's go for a walk. Colonel Westfield watched them go, a strange mixture of hope and dread settling in his gut. As they disappeared into the swirling white hell outside, he wondered if he'd just sent 2 more men to their deaths, or if he was witnessing a miracle in the making. Only time would tell, and in this weather time was the one thing they didn't have. Stepping out of the relative calm of the tent was like stepping into another dimension. The world was gone, replaced by a screaming white void. The wind was a solid wall, a physical entity that shoved and clawed at them, trying to rip the packs from their backs and the breath from their lungs. Snow, hard as sand, scoured any exposed skin. It was impossible to see, impossible to hear anything but the storm's deafening roar. Blackwood leaned into the gale, a small dark shape against the infinite white. She didn't fight it. She moved with it, her body angled, her steps sure, and planted with the aid of the advanced snowshoes. She set a relentless, rhythmic pace. It wasn't fast, but it was constant, a human metronome against the chaos of the storm. The two soldiers followed, stumbling, their world reduced to the vague shape of the person in front of them. The cold was a living thing, predator that sank its fangs deep into their bones. Within 30 minutes, their confidence had been stripped away, leaving only a primal gnawing fear. The path Blackwood chose made no sense to them. Instead of heading directly up the northern trail where Taylor's team had disappeared, she cut east, moving parallel to the ridge. It seemed wrong, counterintuitive, but no one questioned her. The storm had stripped away all pretense of hierarchy. Out here, there was only the one who knew the way and those who followed. An hour into the trek, Martinez faltered. He tripped over a snow-covered rock and went down hard. He tried to get up, but his limbs felt heavy, disconnected. A creeping lethargy was dulling his thoughts. He was getting too cold. Instantly, Blackwood was there. She hadn't seemed to look back. Yet she knew the exact moment he fell. She knelt beside him, a dark specter in the blizzard. She didn't offer a hand. Instead, she ripped open his parka, her movements brutally efficient. She pulled a chemical heat pack from her own gear, activated it with a sharp crack, and shoved it against his chest, directly over his heart. The sudden, intense warmth made him gasp. "You're going into shock," she stated, her voice muffled but clear through her mask. "Your body is shutting down. Breathe in through the nose, out through the mouth. Slow, controlled." She pulled one of the silver tubes from his belt. "Eat this now." Martinez's gloved hands were clumsy, shaking. She took the tube, unscrewed the cap, and pushed the end to his lips. All of it. He squeezed the chalky, tasteless paste into his mouth, forcing himself to swallow. It was vile, but almost immediately he felt a surge of warmth spread from his core. The fog in his brain began to recede. "On your feet, Martinez," Blackwood commanded. She wasn't helping him up. She was ordering him. "The ground will kill you faster than the wind. Get up." He struggled, his muscles screaming. But he got up. "You focus on one thing," she said, her face inches from his. "The step in front of you. Nothing else. Not the cold, not the wind, not how tired you are. Just the next step. Then the one after that. Do you understand me?" Martinez nodded, his teeth chattering. "Good," she said, already turning away and resuming the pace. "Stay with me." They pushed on. Blackwood navigated not by sight, there was nothing to see, but by some internal compass, some deep instinctual understanding of the terrain. She read the subtle shifts in the wind, the texture of the snow under her feet, the angle of the slope. She was not just moving through the storm, she was a part of it. Hours bled into one another, time lost all meaning. There was only the wind, the cold, the rhythmic crunch of snow, and the dark shape of Blackwood leading them forward. She moved with an efficiency born of experience, each step precisely placed, each breath regulated. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. During a brief rest in the lee of a rock outcropping, Jensen finally found the courage to speak. "How do you know where we're going? I can't see a damn thing." Blackwood was checking the signals booster, her eyes on the small screen. "I don't need to see, I can feel it." "Feel what?" "The mountain, the way it breathes, the way it moves under the snow." She glanced up at him. "I spent 3 winters in the Hindu Kush, 2 more in the Alaska range, 6 months on Denali during the worst storm season in 30 years. A pause, a flicker of something like pain crossing her eyes. And one very long night on K2 that wasn't supposed to end the way it did. Jensen stared at her. The casual mention of some of the most dangerous mountains on Earth was more terrifying than any threat. "Who are you?" he whispered. Blackwood didn't answer. She just stood, adjusted her pack, and moved back into the storm. The revelation came in fragments, pieces of a puzzle scattered through the endless white. As they pushed deeper into the maelstrom, Blackwood began to share small, measured doses of knowledge. How to regulate breathing at high altitude to prevent hypoxia. How to recognize the earliest signs of frostbite. how to move efficiently through deep snow without exhausting yourself. Each lesson was delivered in the same calm, measured tone. Each one represented years of hard-won experience, and each one carried the weight of lives saved and lost. The cold makes you stupid before it makes you dead, she told them, as they slogged through a particularly deep drift. It happens so gradually you don't notice. First you stop caring about small things. Then you stop caring about big things. Then you just want to sleep. That's when you're already dying. Martinez looked at her through ice-crusted lashes. Is that what happened to the others, the ones you've lost? A long silence followed, broken only by the howl of the wind. For a moment it seemed she wouldn't answer. Then, sometimes it's an avalanche, sometimes it's a fall, sometimes it's insurgent fire while you're trying to evacuate a wounded soldier from a ridgeline that was supposed to be secure. The flatness of her voice made the horror of the words more stark. The mountains don't care how you die, just that you were unprepared. Jensen looked at Martinez, a silent communication passing between them. The woman leading them through this frozen hell wasn't just experienced. She was something else entirely. A ghost, a legend, someone who had seen and done things they could barely imagine. They pushed on, climbing, now the slope growing steeper. Blackwood set a punishing pace, but there was method to it. She knew exactly how hard to push them enough to keep their core temperatures up, but not so much that they would sweat and risk hypothermia when they stopped. 4 hours into the journey, they reached a granite wall that offered momentary shelter from the direct force of the wind. Blackwood called a halt, motioning them close. We're near the northwestern approach to Serpent's Tooth, she said, her voice barely audible above the storm. If Taylor's team was following standard procedure, they would have sought shelter on the leeward side of this ridge. She unslung the signals booster from her pack, her fingers somehow still nimble in the crippling cold. She worked with astonishing speed, unfolding the antenna, connecting the device to a power source, and tuning the frequency. The storm is creating too much interference for standard comms, she explained, her eyes scanning the device's small screen. This unit doesn't transmit a voice signal. It searches for the faint electronic signature of a frozen radio's battery. She swept the antenna in a slow arc. The device was silent. The wind howled. Hope began to curdle into despair in the pit of Jensen's stomach. They were too late. Then a faint, rhythmic beep echoed in Blackwood's earpiece. A tiny green light flickered on the screen. Got them, she said, her voice devoid of triumph, a simple statement of fact. She frowned, studying the screen. They're not where they should be. They've deviated from the planned route. They're on the eastern face in a snowdrift. They tried to dig in. Martinez looked confused. That's not possible. That's a quarter-mile off the trail on an exposed face. Why would they go there? Fear, Blackwood answered simply. Taylor had a choice between following a plan that wasn't working or trying something different. He chose different. She packed away the device. We need to move. Now. The signal's weak. Their batteries are dying. They set off again, Blackwood leading them on a diagonal traverse across a treacherous slope. The wind here was even more vicious, a horizontal force that threatened to tear them from the mountainside. They moved carefully, deliberately, each step a potential catastrophe if misplaced. 20 minutes later, they reached a slight depression in the snow. Blackwood dropped to her knees and began to dig, not with a shovel, but with her hands, throwing aside snow with manic energy. Jensen and Martinez joined her, their movements frantic. A few feet down, they hit something soft. It was the fabric of a parka. They dug faster, a desperate, adrenaline-fueled frenzy. They uncovered them one by one. 3 men huddled together in a shallow snow cave, barely conscious. They were encased in ice. Their faces blue, their breathing shallow and ragged. One of them, Sergeant Taylor, had a crude splint on his leg. The bone clearly shattered. They were alive, but only just. The thin thread of their existence was about to snap. Blackwood immediately took charge, her calm a stark contrast to the frantic energy of the others. She was no longer just a guide. She was a medic. And it was here in the heart of the storm, surrounded by the near dead, that her true nature was revealed. Jensen, get the plasma warmers ready. Martinez, thermal blankets. I need to assess Taylor's leg. She knelt beside Taylor, the most critically injured. With a practiced hand, she cut away his trouser leg, exposing the mangled limb. The cold had prevented him from bleeding out, but his core temperature was plummeting. As she worked her movements swift and sure, the sleeve of her thermal suit rode up her forearm. In the faint ethereal glow of the storm, Martinez saw it. First, the network of fine silvery scars that crisscrossed her skin, and beneath them a faded tattoo intricate and stark. It was a pair of stylized wings wrapped around a caduceus with a single unsheathed dagger piercing the center. Martinez froze. His blood ran cold for a reason other than the temperature. He knew that symbol. His older brother, a ranger who had served in a dozen hellholes, had spoken of it in hushed, reverent tones. It was the insignia of a ghost unit, a legend whispered around campfires and in classified debriefings. Task Force Guardian. They weren't just medics, they were the absolute elite. A handful of operators sent into the most hostile conditions imaginable, often alone to treat and extract high-value assets or critically wounded soldiers when no one else could. They were renowned for their medical skills, their survival expertise, and their lethality. They were ghosts who walked through fire to pull people out of hell. He looked from the tattoo on her arm to her face, now illuminated by the glow of a medical scanner she was running over Taylor's chest. The quiet logistics sergeant the woman Reynolds had humiliated, the woman who counted boxes and filed requisitions. It was impossible. It was a lie, and yet the truth was right there, inked into her skin. His voice was a dry, choked whisper, nearly lost in the wind. The Guardians. You were one of them. Blackwood didn't look up. Her entire focus was on the injured man in front of her. Her fingers found his pulse faint and thready. His heart rate is dangerously arrhythmic. He's in V-fib, she said, her voice a clinical, detached calm. Jensen, I need the portable defibrillator. Now, Martinez charged the paddles to 200 joules. The reveal was not a moment of glory. It wasn't a confession or a boast. It was an irrelevance, a piece of old data from a past life that had no bearing on the immediate life or death calculus of the present. Sergeant Taylor was dying, and that was the only thing that mattered. Martinez stared for another second, his mind reeling. He remembered another part of his brother's stories. Each Guardian had a call sign, a name they were known by in the field. He looked at the name of the fob stenciled on the container's back at the base Sentinel's watch, and he remembered the call sign his brother had mentioned with particular awe. A medic so skilled at high-altitude operations, they named her after a bird of prey that lived among the peaks. Sentinel. The realization hit him like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. He finally understood. They weren't on a mountain with a logistics sergeant. They were on a mountain with a legend. Paddles! Blackwood's voice snapped him out of his trance. Martinez moved his body, finally responding to the command, his respect for her crystallizing into something far deeper, something akin to pure, unadulterated awe. Blackwood worked tirelessly, her hands moving with a surgeon's precision as she stabilized Taylor's shattered leg. The break was compound, the bone protruding through the skin. In normal circumstances, it would require immediate surgery. These were not normal circumstances. She cleaned the wound with an antiseptic, reset the bone with a swift, brutal movement that made even the hardened soldiers wince, then stabilized it with a high-tech splint from her medical kit. All the while, she monitored his vital signs, administered antibiotics, and kept up a steady stream of technical jargon that went over the heads of her companions. Pulse ox climbing, BP still low but stabilizing, core temp at 93.4 and rising. Let's get some warm saline into him. She moved on to the other two men, their conditions less critical but still dire. Hypothermia had set in their extremities, showing signs of frostbite. She treated them methodically, efficiently, her focus absolute. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. She was in her element. As she worked, Jensen and Martinez exchanged looks. They had both seen their share of combat medics, but this was different. This was like watching a virtuoso perform. Every movement, every decision was executed with a confidence born of thousands of hours of practice under the worst conditions imaginable. We can't move them yet, Blackwood announced, checking Taylor's vitals one more time. They're too unstable. The storm is intensifying. We need to dig in. She outlined the plan. They would expand the crude snow shelter, turning it into a proper snow cave large enough for all 6 of them. They would use the thermal blankets in their body heat to warm the injured men. They would wait out the worst of the storm before attempting the return journey. Under her direction, they worked. She showed them how to find a deep, solid drift and dig into it, creating a tunnel that angled upward to trap warm air. It was agonizing work. Their muscles burned, their lungs screamed for oxygen in the thin air, but driven by her unyielding will, they dug. Within an hour, they had carved a small chamber out of the snowdrift, large enough to shelter all six of them. Once inside, the change was miraculous. The deafening roar of the wind subsided to a dull, distant moan. The temperature inside the cave, warmed by their collective body heat, was dramatically higher than the maelstrom outside. It was a pocket of life carved into the heart of a world of death. Blackwood immediately went to work on the patients, checking vitals, administering saline drips, and redressing Taylor's leg. She moved with a tireless, methodical energy. Jensen and Martinez watched her, their earlier arrogance, a distant, shameful memory. They had been boys playing at being soldiers in the shadow of a true warrior. She had not only saved Taylor's team, she had saved them from their own ignorance. She had shown them what real strength, real fortitude looked like. It wasn't loud. It wasn't boastful. It was quiet, relentless, and utterly competent. As the hours passed, the injured men stabilized. Their color improved. Their breathing became more regular. Taylor even regained consciousness for brief periods, though Blackwood kept him sedated to manage the pain. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside their small sanctuary, a fragile sense of security took hold. During one of the quiet periods, with the injured men sleeping and the constant work of survival, momentarily paused, Jensen finally found the courage to ask the question that had been burning in his mind. Why logistics? Why count blankets when you could be doing this? He gestured vaguely to encompass the medical equipment, the survival skills, the whole impossible situation. Blackwood was checking the bandage on Taylor's leg. She didn't look up. "I was injured," she said simply, as if that explained everything. "We've all been injured," Jensen pressed. "You don't get put on permanent inventory duty for a twisted ankle." Blackwood's hands stilled for a moment. Then she continued her work. 3 years ago, Hindu Kush, my team was extracting a Delta Force unit that had been hit hard during an operation. 4 critically wounded, including their CO. Weather turned, Bird couldn't get in. We went up on foot. Her voice was flat, emotionless, as if reading from a report. Got to them, stabilized the wounded, started the extraction. Then we took fire. Insurgents, well organized. They had night vision NATO weapons. She paused, her eyes distant, seeing something far beyond the walls of the snow cave. I was carrying the Delta CO on my back. He had a sucking chest wound, multiple GSWs to the abdomen. I couldn't put him down to return fire, so I kept moving, made it almost to the extraction point. Then I took 2 in the back. One shattered my L4 vertebra, the other nicked my renal artery. Martinez swallowed hard. How did you survive? A ghost of a smile flickered across her face. Captain Matthews, my mentor, the old man who taught me everything I know. He came back for me, carried both of us the last half-mile under fire, got us to the Bird. The smile faded. The Delta CO made it. I spent 6 months in Walter Reed, then another year in physical therapy, 14 pieces of shrapnel still in me, 3 vertebrae fused. They said I'd never go operational again. She looked up, her eyes hard. So they gave me a desk, counted me as a loss, and I accepted it because what else could I do? The unit moved on. New missions, new operators, life continued. Her gaze shifted to the injured men. But some skills you don't forget. Some instincts don't die, even if they're supposed to. Jensen was silent for a long moment, and FOB Sentinels watch. Why here? Her expression closed again, became unreadable. That's classified. But Martinez was piecing it together. The name of the base, her call sign, it couldn't be a coincidence. They named it after you, didn't they? This whole fob. It's named after Sentinel. Blackwood didn't confirm or deny it. She just went back to checking Taylor's vitals. But her silence was answer enough. After what felt like an eternity, she sensed a subtle shift in the wind's pitch. The storm is breaking, she announced. The pressure is changing. We move in 10 minutes. The journey back was a descent into a frozen hell, but it was a hell with a purpose. Blackwood orchestrated the evacuation with the same terrifying efficiency she had displayed throughout. She showed them how to construct 2 makeshift sleds known as litters, from their trekking poles and thermal blankets, to transport Taylor and the other severely injured man. Keep them insulated, she commanded, her voice a constant, steadying presence in the chaos. Their own body heat is gone. We are their furnace now. She divided the rescued and the rescuers into two teams. She took point, breaking the trail through the deepening snow, while Jensen and Martinez managed the litters. The third man from Taylor's team, though weak, he was able to walk with assistance. The work was brutal, soul-crushing labor. Each step was a battle against the wind, the snow, and the mountain's crushing gravity. They were hauling dead weight, fighting for every single foot of progress. Hours into the return journey, the storm reached its zenith. The wind became a solid, immovable object, and the visibility dropped to the point where they could barely see their own feet. Martinez, exhausted and disoriented, stumbled and lost his grip on the litter. It slid sideways, threatening to tumble into an unseen ravine. Before anyone could react, Blackwood was there. She threw her body against the sled, her boots digging into the ice, arresting its slide with a grunt of raw effort. She was a fixed point in the hurricane, the one constant in a world of chaos. As they neared the base, the storm began to abate. The wind died down to a whisper, and the sky cleared enough to reveal a deep star-dusted indigo. They stumbled back onto the perimeter of Phobie Sentinel's watch like ghosts returning from the grave. The entire base was awake, watching. Figures emerged from tents and containers, their faces pale in the harsh glare of the floodlights. Colonel Westfield stood at the front, his expression etched with tension that broke into profound relief as he saw them approach. And beside him, his arm in a sling and his jaw in a swollen, discolored mess, stood Captain Reynolds. Blackwood led the procession, her face caked with ice, her body moving with the stiff gait of utter exhaustion, but her head was high. Behind her, her small, battered team hauled the litters bearing the men they had pulled from the mountain's teeth. As Blackwood walked past the assembled crowd, past the colonel, past the captain, she had struck. Something happened. Corporal Jensen, without a word or a command, straightened his weary body and snapped to the fiercest, most rigid position of attention he had ever held. His gaze was fixed on Blackwood, an expression of pure, undiluted reverence on his face. A moment later, Martinez did the same. It wasn't a formal salute drilled on a parade ground. It was a raw, spontaneous gesture of profound respect, an acknowledgement from one soldier to another that they were in the presence of something far greater than themselves. It was a silent, powerful testament to what she had done. The other soldiers on the base, sensing the weight of the moment, stood a little straighter. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of boots on snow and the labored breathing of the rescue team. Reynolds watched it all, his arrogance stripped away, leaving him hollowed out. He saw the looks on his men's faces. He saw the rescued patrol alive against all odds. He saw the woman he had tried to break who had instead saved them all. His authority was a shattered ruin, rebuilt on a foundation of her competence. As she passed him, their eyes met for a brief second. Reynolds gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was an apology. It was an admission of his failure. It was a concession of her absolute, undeniable superiority. Blackwood didn't acknowledge him. Her mission wasn't finished. She continued, walking her focus entirely on getting her patients to the warmth and safety of the medical tent. Respect was not a destination for her. It was simply a byproduct of the work. Behind her, Jensen and Martinez followed, their backs straight, despite their exhaustion, their faces set with a new kind of pride. They had walked with Sentinel. They had seen what true courage looked like, and they would never be the same. Later that night, the world was still and silent. The storm had passed, leaving a sky so clear and cold it felt as if the stars might shatter and fall. The official report would list Captain Reynolds' injury as a slip on the ice. The court-martial proceedings against Sergeant Blackwood were quietly and permanently canceled. Some truths were better left buried in the snow. The medical staff at FOB Sentinel's watch worked through the night, stabilizing Taylor and his team. The prognosis was good. They would recover, though Taylor's leg would require multiple surgeries once they were evacuated. Their survival was being called a miracle. But those who had been on the mountain knew better. It wasn't divine intervention. It was skilled determination and the relentless will of a single operator who refused to accept failure. Colonel Westfield stood in the doorway of the medical tent, watching as Blackwood checked Taylor's vitals one more time. Her movements were slow now, heavy with exhaustion, but still precise. She had been awake for more than 30 hours, pushed her body to its limits, and yet refused to rest until her patients were stable. "Sergeant," Westfield said softly, "they're in good hands now. You need to get some sleep." Blackwood nodded, though it seemed more acknowledgement than agreement. She made a final note on Taylor's chart, then walked past the colonel without a word. Her face was a mask of fatigue, eyes sunken, skin pale. But there was something else there too, a quiet satisfaction that came from doing what others claimed was impossible. She made her way slowly across the compound, her body feeling every injury old and new. The cold had aggravated her fused vertebrae, sending tendrils of pain down her spine with each step. But pain was an old friend. She knew how to accommodate it, how to function, despite it. The supply tent was dark and quiet, a refuge from the chaos of the day. She didn't turn on the lights. Instead, she moved by memory and touch to the far corner where her personal gear was stowed. She sat on a crate, listening to the silence. After the constant roar of the storm, the absence of sound was almost painful, a void that pressed against her eardrums. Blackwood reached for her pack, pulled out a small field kit. Inside was a wet stone oil and a cloth. She removed her ice axe, an elegant tool of carbon fiber and titanium, its blade dulled by the day's work. With slow, deliberate movements, she began to sharpen it, drawing the stone along the edge with a steady, rhythmic motion. Shing, shing, shing. The sound was crisp and clean in the vast silence of the tent, a meditation in steel and stone. It was the sound of a professional maintaining her tools. The tent flap opened softly and Jensen stepped inside. He didn't speak. Words felt clumsy, inadequate. He had come to apologize, to try and explain. But seeing her there so completely absorbed in her task, he knew it wasn't necessary. She didn't require his apology. Instead, he walked over to the corner where the rifles of Taylor's rescue team were leaning against a stack of crates. He picked up the first one, a standard issue M4. He took a cleaning kit from a pouch on his belt, pulled a clean rag from it, and began to meticulously break down and clean the weapon. He worked in silence, his movements deliberate, focused. He oiled the bolt, cleaned the barrel, and wiped down the stock, removing every trace of ice and grime from the blizzard. Blackwood never looked up from her sharpening, but she was aware of his presence. The two of them worked in a shared, unspoken communion. He was not just cleaning rifles. He was paying tribute. He was helping her in her world, the world of quiet maintenance and preparation that underpins all successful operations. It was his way of saying thank you. It was his way of showing he finally understood. She finished with the axe, the edge now honed to a razor's sharpness. She tested it carefully against the calloused pad of her thumb, her expression unreadable. Satisfied, she wiped the blade clean and laid it gently back on the tarp. Then she picked up a coil of rope and began to inspect it inch by inch, her scarred, capable hands searching for any fray, any weakness, any imperfection. The quiet work continued under the solitary light, a silent testament to the simple, profound truth that respect is never given. It is always and only earned. A few minutes later, the tent flap opened again. Martinez entered carrying a thermos. He moved to Blackwood's side, set the thermos down next to her. "Coffee," he said simply. "Black, hot." She nodded her thanks but didn't stop her methodical inspection of the rope. Martinez didn't leave. Instead, he picked up another rifle and joined Jensen in the cleaning ritual. Three people working in silence, bound by an experience that had fundamentally altered how they saw each other and themselves. After a time, Martinez spoke, his voice low, respectful. "My brother served in the Rangers, 10th Mountain Division. Afghanistan 2019. He told stories about Guardian Force, about," he hesitated, "about you, about Sentinel." Blackwood's hands paused momentarily on the rope, then resumed their steady inspection. "Operation Frostwing," Martinez continued, "a Delta Force team pinned down in a valley near the Pakistan border. Snowstorm coming in, no air support possible. Everyone wrote them off." He swallowed hard. "Then a single operator went in, brought all 6 men out alive. Some still don't believe it happened." Blackwood said nothing. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but weighted with unspoken truths. "Was that you?" Martinez finally asked. She coiled the rope with precise, practiced movements, securing it with a complex knot. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but clear. "Your brother, is he still serving?" Martinez nodded. "Yes, Staff Sergeant, currently at Fort Drum. Tell him Shepard says hello." The simple acknowledgement sent a chill down Martinez's spine. Shepard, Captain Jack Matthews, was a legend in special operations. The old Mountain warfare instructor who had trained a generation of elite operators. The man who, according to the stories, could navigate through a blizzard using only his sense of touch and smell. I will, Martinez whispered, understanding the gift he had just been given. A confirmation, a connection to a world few ever glimpsed, let alone entered. The tent flap opened a third time. The temperature in the space seemed to drop as Captain Reynolds stepped inside. His jaw was heavily bandaged, his right arm in a sling. His eyes swept the scene, the three of them working in quiet harmony, and for a moment he seemed uncertain. Jensen and Martinez tensed their bodies instinctively, preparing for confrontation. But Blackwood continued her work, her focus undisturbed. Reynolds moved further into the tent, his footsteps loud in the silence. He stopped a respectful distance from Blackwood. "Sergeant," he said, his voice tight with pain, and something else, something that might have been shame. "I came to—" He trailed off, searching for words. Blackwood finally looked up, her eyes meeting his. There was no anger in her gaze, no resentment, just a calm assessment. "Your men are alive, Captain," she said simply. "That's what matters." Reynolds swallowed hard. "Yes, but There are no buts in the mountains," she cut him off. "You either make the right call or people die. You made the wrong call. Your men lived anyway. Learn from it." The bluntness of her words seemed to hit Reynolds physically. He flinched, but then straightened, accepting the rebuke as his due. "I did learn something," he said quietly. "I learned that strength isn't what I thought it was. It's not about who can shout the loudest or carry the most weight. It's about who knows when to listen, who knows what they don't know." He met her gaze directly. "I didn't listen. I didn't know what I didn't know, and it almost cost lives." Blackwood studied him, her expression inscrutable. Then she nodded once, accepting his admission. Reynolds reached inside his jacket with his good hand, removed a small wooden box. He placed it on the crate beside him. "This belongs to you," he said. "Or at least it should." He turned and left without another word, the tent flap falling shut behind him. Blackwood looked at the box for a long moment, not touching it. Jensen and Martinez exchanged glances, curiosity burning in their eyes. But they said nothing, respecting her silence. Finally, she reached for the box. It was old, the wood darkened with age and handling. A simple brass latch held it closed. She opened it carefully. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, was a patch. Not the standard army issue, but something custom-made. It showed an eagle with outstretched wings clutching a caduceus in one talon and a combat knife in the other. Below it, in simple block letters, "Guardian Force," and beneath that a single word, "Sentinel." Alongside the patch was a folded piece of paper. Blackwood opened it, her eyes scanning the handwritten note. "The storm finds us all eventually. When it does, the mountain decides who lives and who dies. But sometimes, just sometimes, the mountain sends a guardian." The signature at the bottom was Simple Matthews. Martinez caught his breath. "Captain Matthews sent you here." Blackwood carefully refolded the note, placed it and the patch back in the box. "No one sent me," she said quietly. "I requested the assignment." "But why?" Jensen asked, unable to contain his confusion. "Why leave everything behind to count blankets at a forgotten outpost?" "Because this is where I'm needed." She closed the box with a gentle click. "Not for the glory missions, not for the high-value targets, but for days like today, when ordinary soldiers face extraordinary circumstances, when the margin between life and death is measured in minutes and degrees." She looked at them, her gaze steady. "The Guardian Force exists to protect those who protect others. Sometimes that means dramatic rescues behind enemy lines. Sometimes it means being in the right place at the right time with the right skills." She stood, tucking the box into her jacket. "Tomorrow, Taylor and his team will be medevaced to a proper hospital. In a month, they'll be back with their families. In a year, they'll be telling war stories at the local VF, and no one will know how close they came to being another statistic, another training accident in a forgotten corner of the world." She moved to the tent entrance, then paused, looking back at them. "That's the job, not the medals, not the recognition, just the knowledge that someone walked away who wouldn't have otherwise." With that, she was gone, leaving Jensen and Martinez alone with their thoughts and the rifles they were cleaning. "Did you know?" Martinez asked after a long silence. "Before today, did you have any idea who she was?" Jensen shook his head. "No, she was just the quiet logistics sergeant, the one who never joined us at the mess hall, the one Reynolds liked to torment." He reassembled the rifle he was cleaning with practiced movements. "And now, How we know, Martinez finished for him. We know what she is, what she's done. And what we aren't, Jensen added softly, what we haven't done. Outside, the night air was crystalline, so cold it burned the lungs. Blackwood stood at the edge of the perimeter, looking out at the mountains that surrounded the base. In the moonlight, they were otherworldly ancient sentinels of stone and ice. She knew their names, their moods, their dangers. They were her element, her home in a way no building ever could be. The pain in her back was a constant throb, now a reminder of her limitations, of her mortality. The doctors had told her she would never operate again, never return to the field. They had meant it as a kindness, a way to help her accept her new reality. But they had underestimated her, as so many had before. She touched the wooden box through her jacket, feeling its solidity. Matthews had known. Of course he had. The old man saw everything, understood everything. He had guided her here to this place, this moment, not through orders, but through the wisdom that had made him a legend. The mountain decides, she murmured to herself, echoing his words from long ago. The mountain decides who lives and who dies. But sometimes, just sometimes, it allows for a guardian to intervene. The sound of footsteps crunching in the snow behind her made her turn. Colonel Westfield approached, his breath clouding in the frigid air. "Beautiful night," he said, coming to stand beside her. "Hard to believe that just a few hours ago it was trying to kill us all." "The mountain doesn't try to kill you, sir," Blackwood replied. "It just is. Our mistakes are what kill us." Westfield nodded, accepting the correction. They stood in companionable silence, looking out at the vast moonlit landscape. "I've been making some calls," Westfield said eventually, "about your situation, about your future." Blackwood didn't react, her face impassive in the pale light. "There are options, you know," he continued. "Your skills, your experience, they're being wasted in logistics. The Army needs operators like you, especially now." He turned to look at her directly. "The Guardian Force has been reactivated. Full operational status. New mission parameters, but the same core function. High-risk extraction and medical support in denied or difficult environments." Now she did react, a slight stiffening of her posture, the only indication of her surprise. "Matthews is running it," Westfield added. "He asked for you specifically. Said, and I quote, 'Tell Sentinel the nest is empty without her.'" The mountain wind whispered around them, carrying the scent of pine and ice. Blackwood's mind raced with possibilities, with implications. A return to operational status. A chance to do what she was born to do. But also a return to the life that had nearly destroyed her body, that had left her with scars both visible and invisible. "I haven't been cleared for field operations," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "My medical status has been reviewed." Westfield finished for her, by specialists at Walter Reed, by people who understand what's at stake. He handed her a sealed envelope. "Your new orders if you choose to accept them, or you can stay here, continue your current assignment. The choice is yours." Blackwood took the envelope, her fingers tracing the official seal. "Why now?" she asked. "Why after all this time?" Westfield's expression was solemn in the moonlight. "Because the world doesn't stop turning just because we wish it would. Because there are operations happening right now that need your particular skill set. Because sometimes the only way to save lives is to send in someone who can do the impossible." He paused. "And because Jack Matthews is a stubborn old bastard who doesn't take no for an answer." That drew a small smile from her, the first genuine one he had seen. "You have 48 hours to decide," Westfield said. "After that, the offer goes away, and we all pretend this conversation never happened." He turned to go, then stopped. "For what it's worth, Sergeant, what you did today was beyond extraordinary. It was a reminder of what one person with the right skills, the right mindset, and the right heart can accomplish." He met her gaze. "The Army needs more of that. The world needs more of that." He walked away, leaving her alone with the mountains and the stars and the weight of a decision that would define the rest of her life. The dawn came crisp and clear, the sun painting the snow-capped peaks in shades of gold and rose. The base came alive with activity, preparations underway for the medical evacuation. A Black Hawk helicopter was inbound ETA 30 minutes. In the medical tent, Sergeant Taylor was awake, his face drawn with pain but his eyes clear. Blackwood checked his vitals one last time, adjusted his IV drip. "You're going to be fine," she told him. "The surgeons at Landstuhl will fix that leg. You'll be running again in 6 months." Taylor looked at her, his expression a mixture of gratitude and awe. "Jensen told me what you did, How you found us, how you... He trailed off, shaking his head. We were dead. We knew it. And then you were there like some kind of ghost. Blackwood shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Right place, right time. No, Taylor said firmly. It wasn't luck. It was you, specifically you. He reached out, caught her wrist with surprising strength. Thank you for my life, for all of us. She nodded once, accepting his gratitude without false modesty. Just doing my job, Sergeant. Your job, he repeated with a weak laugh. If counting boxes includes mountain rescue, I'd hate to see your actual resume. A commotion outside interrupted them. The distinctive whoomp, whoomp, whoomp of helicopter rotors grew louder, drowning out all other sounds. The medevac had arrived. Time to go home, Sergeant, Blackwood said, patting his shoulder. Your family is waiting. She stepped back as the medical team rushed in to prepare the patients for transport. Her part was done. She had brought them back from the edge, given them a second chance. Now it was up to others to complete their journey. Outside, she shielded her eyes against the swirling snow kicked up by the helicopter's downdraft. The massive Black Hawk settled onto the landing zone, its rotors still spinning. Medical personnel rushed forward with stretchers, their movements practiced and efficient. As they loaded Taylor into the helicopter, Blackwood felt a presence beside her. Reynolds, his face still swollen, watched the evacuation with an unreadable expression. Will they make it? He asked, his voice barely audible over the roar of the engines. Yes, she answered simply. They're strong. They'll recover. Reynolds nodded. Good. That's good. He hesitated, then added, I was wrong about you, Sergeant. About a lot of things. I let my own issues cloud my judgment. It won't happen again. She studied him, seeing beyond the bravado to the man beneath. A career officer struggling with his own failures, his own insecurities. A man who had nearly cost lives because of his pride. Make sure it doesn't, Captain, she said, not unkindly. The next mountain might not be so forgiving. He accepted the rebuke with a nod. Then to her surprise, he extended his hand. I hope we meet again, Sergeant, under better circumstances. She took his hand, felt the strength in his grip. Better circumstances would be nice, she agreed. The last patient was loaded. The helicopter's engines increased their pitch, preparing for liftoff. Reynolds moved away back toward the command post. Blackwood stayed watching as the Black Hawk rose into the clear blue sky, banked sharply, and headed south, carrying its precious cargo to safety. She felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Mission complete. Lives saved. The circle closed. As she turned to go, she saw them, Jensen and Martinez, standing at attention near the perimeter fence. As she approached, they saluted her, not with the casual sloppiness of daily routine, but with the crisp precision reserved for moments of genuine respect. She returned the salute, acknowledging what didn't need to be said. You're different, Jensen observed as they fell into step beside her. Something's changed. The mission's over, she replied simply. Is it? Martinez asked, his tone knowing. Or is it just beginning? She glanced at him, surprised by his perception. What makes you say that? The box the captain gave you, the calls the colonel was making, the way you've been looking at the mountains all morning. He shrugged. Doesn't take a genius to see something's coming. She stopped walking, turned to face them both. If I were to leave, she said carefully, what would happen here? Jensen straightened slightly. The mission would continue. The base would function. We would adapt. His expression grew serious. But we'd remember. What you showed us, what you taught us, it wouldn't be wasted. Martinez nodded in agreement. Some lessons stick with you forever. Like how to move through a storm, how to face impossible odds, how to never give up no matter what. He met her gaze steadily. Those aren't just mountain skills, Sergeant. They're life skills. Blackwood felt something shift inside her, a quiet realization settling into place. She had come to Phoebe's Sentinel's watch looking for anonymity, for a place to hide while she healed. But perhaps her presence had served a greater purpose. Perhaps in her own way, she had been a guardian here too, not just of lives, but of principles, of standards, of the intangible qualities that define true service. If I go, she said slowly, I'll need someone to take care of my gear, someone who understands its value, someone who knows how to maintain it properly. Jensen and Martinez exchanged glances, understanding the implicit trust being offered. We'd be honored, Sergeant, Martinez said. Everything would be ready for when you return. If I return, she corrected gently. When Jensen insisted with a small smile, the mountain always calls you back. That's what they say, right? She couldn't argue with that. The mountains did call, and for too long she had been ignoring their summons bound by injury and doubt and the weight of past failures. But now with Matthew's message with the official orders burning a hole in her pocket, with the evidence of what she could still accomplish, fresh in her mind, the call was impossible to ignore. That evening, as the sun set behind the western peaks painting the snow in shades of crimson and gold, Olivia Blackwood stood once more at the perimeter fence. Her decision was made, her path clear. She would return to Guardian Force, to the work she was born to do. Not for glory or recognition, but because it was necessary. Because there were still lost souls in need of finding, still impossible rescues waiting to be attempted, still lives hanging in the balance that only someone with her particular skills could save. She felt a presence behind her and turned to find Colonel Westfield approaching, hands in his pockets against the cold. "Beautiful sunset," he commented, coming to stand beside her. "Yes," she agreed. "One of the benefits of being this high up, you see things differently." "Indeed you do." He glanced at her. "Have you decided?" She nodded, once decisive. "I have." "And I'll go," she said simply. "Back to Guardian Force. Back to the field." Westfield nodded as if he had never expected any other answer. "When tomorrow." She looked out at the mountains, her gaze distant. "The sooner the better." "Your replacement won't arrive for at least a week," he pointed out. "The logistics operation will function just fine," she interrupted gently. "Jensen and Martinez know the system now. They can handle it until the new sergeant arrives." A small smile touched her lips. "Besides, I've already organized it, everything. Every box aligned, every label facing out, just as ordered." Westfield chuckled at that. "Of course you have." He sobered, his expression becoming serious. "For what it's worth, Sergeant Blackwood, it's been an honor having you here, brief though it was. What you did yesterday, it won't be forgotten." "It's what anyone would have done," she replied, the standard deflection of praise. "No," he said firmly, "it's what you did, what only you could have done." He extended his hand. "Godspeed, Sentinel. The mountains are waiting." She took his hand, her grip firm. "Thank you, sir, for everything." As Westfield walked away, Blackwood turned back to the vista before her. The mountains stood silent and majestic, bathed in the last light of day. They had been here long before humans walked the earth, and they would remain long after. They were indifferent to human struggles, to human triumphs. They simply were. But among them walked guardians, those who understood their language, their moods, their dangers. Those who could move through storms, navigate impossible terrain, bring back the lost and the wounded when all hope seemed gone. Those who, like the mountains themselves, stood as silent sentinels against the chaos of the world. Olivia Blackwood, Sergeant Guardian Sentinel, took a deep breath of the thin, crystalline air. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new missions, new mountains to conquer. But for tonight, she was content to stand watch, as she always had, over those who needed protection most. In the distance, the peaks glowed with the last light of day, their shadows stretching across the valleys like protective arms. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the eternal promise of the mountains. The storm finds us all eventually. But sometimes, just sometimes, it also brings a guardian.